The African Deep Dive podcast is brought to you by the African Technology Policy Studies Network. This podcast explores how science, technology, and innovation can drive sustainable development and global inclusion in Africa.
Okay, so you know how sometimes you just feel completely swamped by information, news, studies, everything? It's just a lot.
Oh, definitely. Especially with huge global issues like climate change or food security. It's hard to know where to even start.
Right, and that's what we try to do here in the deep dive. We grab some really interesting sources and try to pull out the most important stuff for you.
Filter through the noise, basically.
Exactly, and today we're doing a deep dive into something, well, I think is incredibly important, but maybe doesn't get enough attention.
Okay.
It's about how ancient wisdom, traditional knowledge, is actually providing real practical solutions for water access and food security, especially with, climate change making things so unpredictable.
That sounds fascinating. Where are we focusing?
Our main source is a 2013 research paper. It's called Indigenous Rainwater Harvesting Practices for Climate Adaptation and Food Security in Dry Areas, the Case of Bahi District.
Okay, Bahi District.
And it was published by the African Technology Policy Studies Network. Seems really solid.
Right. So our mission for this deep dive then is sort of extracting the key lessons. How are these communities in Tanzania actually adapting to water scarcity?
Yeah, understanding their traditional methods, what makes them work.
And crucially, seeing how maybe simple community-driven improvements can make a big difference. It sounds like we're looking at how local knowledge, when you sort of boost it strategically, can lead to really powerful, sustainable outcomes.
That's the idea. We'll look at the reality of water scarcity in this specific place, Bahi District. We'll explore the ingenious traditional ways they've coped for probably centuries. And then we dive into the practical, pretty low-cost improvements that the research suggests could really transform things for them right now.
Okay, I'm ready. Let's get into it. Bahi District, Tanzania.
So let's unpack this. Picture this place. Bahi District, it's in Tanzania's Dodoma region, and it's tough, really tough.
How tough are we talking?
It's one of the driest districts in the whole country. They only get about 400 to 600 millimeters of rain a year.
Wow, that's very little, less than many semi-arid regions.
Exactly, and most of that tiny amount falls in just one short rainy season, like December to March.
So the rest of the year is incredibly dry.
Precisely.
And, it's important to remember, Bahi isn't alone in this. The paper points out wider climate change impacts across Tanzania.
Right, like rising temperatures.
Yeah, consistently over the last 30 years, based on data from, I think, 21 weather stations. And this leads to, severe droughts more often.
Which has knock-on effects, obviously.
Huge ones. Lake levels dropping dramatically. Lake Victoria, one of the Great Lakes, dropped over 2.5 meters between 1965 and 2006.
2.5 meters, that's massive.
It is. And many rivers, smaller lakes, especially in central Tanzania, they've just dried up permanently.
Wow. And that must impact everything. Power, farming.
Absolutely. Power crises because of low hydro dams, poor crop yields, fewer fish. It even drags down the national economic growth rate. Below 6%, partly because of these droughts, the paper suggests.
Okay, so bringing it back to Bahi, to the villages the study focused on, Chipanga and Mpalanga.
Yes, those two.
They were chosen specifically because things are so extreme there, right? The drought, the lack of water, the poverty.
Exactly, and for the families living there, the water situation is just dire. The study found they get maybe half the water they need day to day during the wet season.
Only half, and the dry season must be worse.
Much worse. Less than a quarter of their daily need. Think about that, less than 25%.
That's hard to even imagine. So how do they cope? What do they do when the rains stop and the seasonal streams dry up? Which happens pretty early, right? April or May.
Yeah, by late April, early May, those streams, which can be like 2 to 12 kilometers away already.
Wow, that's quite a walk.
It is. And when they dry up, people are forced to dig these temporary shallow holes like ponds right there in the riverbanks, just trying to access whatever water might be left seeped in the ground.
So long walks, digging, just for scarce, probably not very clean water.
That's the reality.
And the paper highlighted a really interesting problem. Trying to introduce, modern water harvesting tech often failed there. Why was that again?
It came down to the roofs. They're traditional houses built with logs, mud, grasses. Well, those materials just aren't suitable for the typical gutter and tank rainwater collection systems we might think of.
Ah, okay. So the standard solutions just didn't fit the local context, made it really hard to improve water access using those methods.
Exactly, which really sets the stage for why looking at the indigenous practices is so important.
Right. And this is where it gets really interesting, I think. Because this indigenous knowledge, it's not just some old relic, is it? The paper frames it as something dynamic.
Absolutely. It's knowledge that people in a community have developed over, generations, constantly adapting it to their specific environment. And rainwater harvesting itself, it's ancient. Practiced for, over 4,000 years globally.
That's incredible. And in Tanzania specifically, there's a rich history of this too, right? Not just in Bahi.
Oh, yes. The paper mentions several examples, like Majaluba. These are sort of excavated basins for growing rice found in the lake zone.
Okay.
Or Vinungu, raised basins in Iringa. And Adiva, special water storage structures up in the Kilimanjaro area.
So different techniques for different regions and needs.
Exactly. And there's another concept, Mashamba Yambuga. That's where farmers cleverly plant water-hungry crops in lower areas to capture runoff from the higher ground around them.
Smart. Using the landscape itself.
Precisely. And the key takeaway is that these methods have lasted because they work with the local way of life, with the social systems. They're sustainable because they're integrated.
Okay, so what about in Chipanga A and Mpumalanga, the villages in Bahi? What specific methods did the researchers document there?
They found two main indigenous techniques being used, which really show that resourcefulness.
Yeah.
First, some villagers would actually hang pieces of cloth off the edges of their flat roofs
Clothes? Why?
to try and catch the rainwater, but also, crucially, to filter out some of the dust and mud particles from the roof surface before the water dripped down into buckets on the ground.
Oh, wow. Okay. Simple but clever. And the second method?
The second involved collecting runoff from the ground. They'd dig shallow holes or pits in the open areas around their houses, particularly where the soil was a mix of clay, sand, and loam stuff that wouldn't let the water just soak away instantly.
Ah, capturing surface runoff.
Exactly. They'd collect that water in buckets, let the sediment settle out a bit, and then use it.
Ingenious, definitely. But the paper also mentioned these weren't perfect solutions.
Right. While they were definitely clever, the study described them as not widely spread and, importantly, never sufficient to meet all their water needs. They helped, they supplemented, but didn't solve the core scarcity problem.
Okay, that context is key. They were coping, but barely.
Precisely. Which leads us nicely into the potential for improvement.
And just before we get there, you mentioned the paper clarifies terminology in situ versus ex situ harvesting.
Yeah. Quickly, in situ is basically managing soil within the field. Think techniques to help more rain soak in right where the crops are growing, reduce runoff there.
Okay, like conservation agriculture techniques?
Sort of, yeah. Improving infiltration for direct crop use. Ex situ, on the other hand, is collecting water from outside the area where it'll be finally used, like off rooftops or large ground surfaces.
Instead of storing it somewhere else.
Exactly. Storing it in tanks, ponds, cisterns, wells, whatever. For multiple uses, domestic, maybe some small irrigation, livestock.
Got it. And the traditional methods in Bahi, the claws, and the pits, they sound more like ex situ.
Definitely leaning towards ex situ, yeah. Collecting and storing, even if the storage was just buckets initially.
Okay, so the traditional methods were clever, but not enough. This is where the study gets really practical, right? It didn't just describe the problem, it looked at solutions.
Yes, and importantly, solutions that build on what people were already doing or understood, not just imposing something totally new.
Which is often why projects fail, isn't it? When they ignore the local context.
Absolutely. So what do they suggest? For the rooftop harvesting, the modifications were surprisingly simple, but potentially very effective.
Like what?
Well, one idea was using thin plastic sheeting or even locally available animal skins laid on the traditional mud roof.
Ah, to create a barrier.
Exactly. To stop the rainwater mixing with the mud and dirt on the roof surface, and also to prevent it just soaking through the roof material. So you collect more water, and it's cleaner.
Makes sense. Any other roof ideas?
Another, slightly more involved, but still feasible suggestion was to actually put a thin layer of mixed cement and sand over the existing roof structure.
Cementing the traditional roof.
Yeah, just a thin layer. And maybe giving it a very slight slope so the water runs off easily towards a collection point, like a simple gutter leading to a tank or bucket.
That sounds really practical, actually. It doesn't mean rebuilding the whole house or changing the fundamental structure.
Not at all. It's enhancing the existing roof. The logs, sand, grasses are still there underneath, providing the structure. You're just adding a more effective collection surface.
And the cost? That's always a factor.
The paper estimates it's remarkably low. For a typical roof size, maybe 3 by 7 meters, they figured about 3 bags of cement would do it.
Okay. And how much is that?
At the time of the study, in Bahi, one bag was about 17,000 Tanzanian shillings, which they calculated as roughly 11 US dollars.
So maybe 35 US dollars for the cement for a one-time investment?
Pretty much. A one-time cost that makes the roof stronger, waterproof, and usable for water harvesting for years. Plus, the paper notes, it doesn't need highly skilled technicians to apply it. Local builders could manage it.
That affordability and simplicity seem key. Did the study mention how much difference this could make?
Yes, it estimated that these simple modifications could potentially increase the amount of water collected by 2 to 3 times what they were getting before.
2 to 3 times, just from adding plastic sheeting or a thin cement layer.
It shows the potential of small, targeted improvement.
Definitely. And what about collecting the runoff from the ground? Were there suggestions there too?
Yeah, the study really emphasized the huge open spaces surrounding each house in those villages. Basically, lots of unused land right next to homes.
Okay, so potential collection areas.
Ideal locations, the paper suggests, for building proper cisterns underground or partially underground tanks with simple channels dug to direct the surface runoff into them.
Like dedicated storage tanks instead of just shallow pits.
Exactly. More permanent, larger capacity storage. And these could be built by individual households.
Or maybe shared.
Or shared, yeah. Shared between a couple of nearby houses to pool resources, reduce the cost per family, and make better use of the space.
That makes sense too. Were there examples of this working elsewhere?
The paper actually references existing engineering designs for cisterns used successfully in other dry parts in Tanzania. So it's not a theoretical idea. It's proven tech that could be adapted for Bahi, from small household tanks right up to larger ones for a whole village or a school.
And the benefit is storing water for that long dry season.
That's the crucial part, bridging the gap between rains.
So the researchers discussed these ideas, the improved roofs, the cisterns with the communities in Chipengere and Mpumalanga. What was the reaction?
It sounds like it was incredibly positive. The study reported that after these discussions, over 90% of the households said they were ready and willing to adopt these kinds of rainwater harvesting improvements.
Over 90%. That's a huge level of buy-in.
It really is. It suggests they saw the tangible benefits. They recognized this wasn't just some abstract idea, but a real path to significantly improving their water situation and, by extension, their lives.
Which brings us to the why this matters part. What are those bigger benefits?
Well, they're profound, really. Accessing enough safe water, it just ripples outwards.
Okay, like better health?
Definitely.
Yeah.
Improved hygiene, better sanitation. But also, critically, it saves so much time and sheer physical labor, especially for women and children who usually bear the burden of fetching water.
Right, hours spent walking and carrying water every day.
Hours they could be using for other things: income generation, education, farming.
And the impact on food security, the paper mentioned that specifically.
Yes, huge potential there. Rainwater harvesting, done effectively, could potentially double food production in these areas, particularly for rain-fed agriculture, which remembers how most of the world's staple foods are grown.
Double production. Wow, how?
By reducing the risk of crop failure during dry spells or droughts. Having that stored water allows for supplemental irrigation at critical times. The paper even mentions the possibility of tripling maize yields in vulnerable areas like Bahi.
Tripling yields, that's not just surviving, that's potentially thriving. A fundamental shift.
Exactly. It's about building resilience.
So, thinking about the people involved, who are the actual community members in Bahi that we're talking about? The study painted an interesting demographic picture.
It did. It's quite striking, actually. Over 69%, nearly 70% of the community members were elderly, defined as 50 years or older.
That's a very high proportion. What about education?
Also quite challenging. Over 60% were primary school leavers, and more than 30% were illiterate.
And where are the younger adults?
Many of the middle-aged generation have apparently migrated to cities, looking for work, seeking, better opportunities, leaving mostly the very young and the older generations in the villages.
So you have an older population, often with limited formal education, managing these tough conditions.
Yes, and within that population, the study really highlights the absolutely central role of women.
In what ways?
Well, obviously in family care, but also heavily involved in farming activities. And as we mentioned, they have the primary responsibility for fetching water, day in, day out.
So any successful adaptation strategy really needs to involve and empower women directly.
Absolutely critical. The paper identifies awareness campaigns and specific training workshops for women on rainwater harvesting as a key factor for making these improvements stick and scale up.
Makes sense. And are they only relying on rainwater harvesting? Or did the study mention other ways these communities are adapting?
Oh, they're already adapting in other ways, too. It shows their resilience.
Uh,
For example, they've shifted cropping patterns,
How so?
moving away from water-thirsty crops like maize and beans, and instead planting more drought-resistant things: millet, sunflower, sesame, things that can better handle the dry conditions.
Smart adaptation. Anything else?
They also use traditional soil management techniques, like adding cow dung to the soil.
For fertility.
Yes, but also crucially to improve the soil's ability to hold on to whatever moisture it gets, enhancing that in situ water retention we talked about earlier.
So it's a combination of strategies. Water harvesting is one piece of a bigger adaptation puzzle.
Exactly. And making these rainwater harvesting improvements happen requires collaboration, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Who did the study identify as key players to help promote these ideas?
Right, it's not just the villagers themselves. The study pointed to district officials. They already have established connections with the villages.
Okay, local government.
Yeah, and also community-based organizations, CBOs, and NGOs working in the area.
Groups already on the ground.
Exactly. And interestingly, the media too, especially radio,
Radio. Why radio?
because it's widely available, widely accessed, even in remote rural areas, a powerful tool for spreading awareness and information.
Good point. And what kind of methods for sharing the knowledge?
Things like practical training sessions, obviously, but also organizing trips, excursions for villagers to visit other dry areas in Tanzania where similar techniques are already working successfully.
Seeing is believing. Learning from peers.
Exactly. And simple, clear leaflets or brochures written in Swahili, the local language, explaining the techniques,
Wow.
making the information accessible.
So, a multi-pronged approach to communication and support.
Seems to be the most effective way.
Okay. So we've covered the challenges, the indigenous ingenuity, the potential improvements, the people involved.
Yeah, quite a journey into Bahi district. So, stepping back, what does this whole deep dive mean for you, the listener, trying to make sense of these big global challenges?
Well, I think this case study from Bahi offers a really powerful insight, doesn't it? It suggests that sometimes, maybe often, the best solutions aren't about finding some brand new, super high-tech, expensive fix that comes from the outside.
Right. Not always about reinventing the wheel.
Exactly. Sometimes it's about looking closely at what's already there, recognizing, really valuing, and then subtly enhancing the practical wisdom that communities have built up over generations, knowledge that's already tailored to the local reality.
Combining that sort of ancient ingenuity with simple, accessible, low-cost tweaks.
Precisely. And through that combination, you unlock not just water, but potentially much more greater self-sufficiency, better food security, and ultimately profound resilience for communities facing the brunt of our changing climate.
It makes you wonder, doesn't it? How might this kind of approach, starting with local knowledge, empowering communities, focusing on affordable enhancements, how might that apply to other complex global problems we face? Something to think about.
A very provocative thought indeed. Finding the power in the local, in the existing wisdom.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for listening to this deep dive. Till next time, have a good one.
Thank you for listening. Join us every Thursday for more insightful conversations.